All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call to order this regular meeting of the Council of the Corporation of the Municipality of Kincardine at 5 o'clock on July 24, 2024 in the council chambers at the Municipal Administration Center. We begin with roll call this evening. Deputy Mayor Clark.
Present.
Councillor Blackwell.
Present.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Present.
Councillor Hinchberger.
Present.
Councillor Kennedy.
Present.
Councillor Prenger.
Present.
Councillor Steinoff Gray.
Present.
Councillor Stewart.
Present.
And I'd also like to acknowledge a number of our staff here and online, and Councillor Kennedy also was online as well. So we'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're meeting on the traditional lands and territory or treaty territory of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, which includes the Chippewas of Nawash Unceded First Nation and the Chippewas of Saugeen First Nation, whose ancestors were the first to inhabit, care for, and live on this land. We recognize and deeply appreciate the contributions that Indigenous peoples have made, both in caring for this land and shaping and strengthening this community, our province, and our country. And as a public service organization, our municipal government, we are dedicated to learning and acknowledging Indigenous history and culture, and we're committed to actions that move us towards a journey of truth, healing, and reconciliation with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, the Métis Nation of Ontario, and the historic Saugeen Métis. Are there any amendments, additions, or deletions to or from the agenda this evening? As always, I'd like to remind council members to disclose any pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof, either now or as it arises during the meeting. We need a mover and seconder that the minutes of the council meeting held July 10, 2024 be adopted as printed. Councillors Blackwell and Stewart, all in favor? That's carried. All right. We begin with our staff reports tonight. We are going to have the continued conversation regarding the Secord monument and an update from our facilitator, Dr. Laura May Lindo. So as you may recall, Council approved the resources, the plan, the process to engage our community in facilitated conversation about equity. But we also knew it was more than about that, more than the statue. We knew it was about respect, and symbolism, and inclusion. And we are grateful that Dr. Lindo is here this evening to present that report. So it's not council's intent on passing any motion or direction to council or to staff this evening. It is our opportunity. The municipality has had a substantial opportunity to have a conversation with Dr. Lindo, and tonight it's council's opportunity to have that conversation. We will, it is our intent to receive the report tonight. We will not further the conversation regarding the Secord monument through August, which is Emancipation Month. We might be privileged to participate in some learning opportunities, but that is to be figured out yet at this point. The decision regarding the monument comes hopefully in September, but that is based on the amount of conversation that we need. We're not going to cut conversation off the debate, but on the other hand, we will not stretch it out. We don't want to linger on this process more than we need to. So I'd like to comment that I have been saddened and offended by comments that some have expressed, their attitudes and their ideologies that really do not reflect the values of this council and the values of this community to which we aspire. It is hard to have conversations about racial issues. They're hard, but they're necessary as we respectfully build inclusive relationships now and, more importantly, into the future. So with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Lindo to our council meeting tonight, and I would ask our Manager of Strategic Initiatives, Laura Fiozzi, to begin the conversation tonight.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor.
Mayor Craig. I wanted to start with a little bit of an overview of the process to date before turning it over to Dr. Lindo. I just think it's important to kind of ground ourselves in what's happened around the process to get us to the point of understanding and hearing what we heard from the public. Um, After council's motion, staff had conversations with municipalities, and that's how we started our journey. That were either in conversations about a monument or a statue or something of a commemoration that paid tribute to a time or a person in history that was troublesome. And troublesome is a very light word. Horrific probably is a better description of it. Through the meetings with the municipalities, we really learned about the public engagement process, what their outcomes were, what their lessons learned were. We obtained advice on how to manage the process successfully. And one of the key things that we heard was hire a facilitator that fits some of the most crucial criteria in order to be successful. Factors that we looked at when we chose our facilitator was hiring somebody who was external, who didn't have ties to the community, in order to remain neutral. That didn't really have sort of those connections, but really was outside the community. They had previous experience facilitating community conversations about monuments and the commemoration of people. That was a really important factor when other municipalities talked about the success of dealing with the issues. Having strong facilitation experience and presentation skills, a positive track record in teaching inclusion and equity work, and a strong understanding about the changing nature of the commemoration of people. So having that kind of background was really key in choosing a facilitator. And based on the advice, we did do some interviews, and Dr. Laura May Lindo was the successful candidate, and it has been a pleasure working with Dr. Lindo. And really, her job was to help us provide advice on the facilitation process and then conduct the actual public engagement process. So that way, then it was an outside facilitator conducting the engagement. Dr. Lindo, among many, many things, just a couple of snapshots of her background. She holds a master's degree and a PhD in education. She's an assistant professor at the University of Waterloo. She's a former member of provincial parliament for Kitchener Centre, so she definitely has an understanding of the political world. She's with the Ontario's opposition and critic for anti-racism and equity, as well as colleges and universities. And that's just a little sample of her credentials. And I just feel really fortunate that we've had her working on this for our community. And before I just turn it over to Dr. Lindo, I just want to make a couple of comments about the engagement process itself. And it was again based on advice. And so first phase, we started in March of 2024. It was completed on May 31st. And we used very different methods for gathering input in order for people to provide input in the way that they wish to participate. We had a public survey that was launched on March the 12th. It was available online as well as in paper form so that people could, if they chose not to complete it online or couldn't complete it online, there were paper copies of it available. It was promoted in multiple times and on multiple channels, including social media, radio, newspaper, postcards, through networks, etc. It was promoted widely and farly, if that's a word. 475 people participated in the survey, and the purpose of the survey was to collect information about the issues that needed consideration, the perspectives and the worries from the community suggestions on who needs to be engaged in the discussions about the monument. The other part of the consultation and the engagement process was small group community conversations that were held in April with people who were interested in history and heritage, who were interested in equity and inclusion, in preserving the monument in its original form, and residents requesting participation. And those groups were all identified through the input that was collected through the survey. So that was one of the questions we asked, and that's how we chose and then solicited participation in those small group conversations. So after that one round of conversations, we had another round of small group community conversations in May. And that invitation was put out to the public through and promoted through social media, the website and newspapers, et cetera, in order to invite people to participate. And they signed up, and then we would register them in for a session, either, one-on-one or a couple of people. And so that's basically the main part of the process. We have done some historical research on timelines. We've produced an FAQ every time we've had questions from the public that was posted on our website. Again, to make the process transparent, we had updates that were done on a regular basis to give an update around where we were in the process. So again, trying to keep the public informed on where we're at. So So really, I'm turning it over to Dr. Lindo she's created a summary of what she's heard through the engagement process. She's here to provide you with with an overview and an opportunity for council to ask questions of all the things that she heard as she went through this process. And I'd really like to welcome Dr. Lindo to the municipality of Kincardine.
Thank you so much. I have to just take half a second to point out that on my very first slide, I have the year 2023. And at first I was going to say, let's just move it right along to the next slide. But then I thought, no, it's probably good for us to take half a second and recognize that it doesn't matter your level of expertise. It doesn't matter what you know or who you know, we're going to make mistakes. And in fact, we're going to make mistakes when we're engaging in this process. The reason I wanted us to take a deep breath and start there is because what I heard, if I could sort of summarize that in a sentence or two, would be that the community is looking to you as leaders, elected officials, but leaders in community more so, to help them navigate a really difficult conversation. And to do that, we are going to make mistakes. The question is, how do we make those mistakes, or how do we respond to the mistakes that we make? And so for me, it means I'm going to change 2023 to 2024 and resend you this PowerPoint, but I'm also going to publicly acknowledge that that error was made. So with that, next slide, please. Overview of what will happen today, a land acknowledgement, which you've already heard, but I'm going to just go through it once more for a particular reason. I'll do an overview of some of the key issues that have arisen that arose both through the process, but are still continuing in the municipality. I'll again review some of the themes and from both the survey and the community conversations. I'll go through a couple of the questions that are in the report to council, and then I'll open it up for questions, and hopefully we'll have a robust conversation following that. Next slide, please. So the land acknowledgement, you've heard the land acknowledgement for the land that we are on right now, and I believe very strongly in making sure that I acknowledge that the report is being delivered on this land. However, I also have to add, and you can go to the next slide again, that I actually conducted the survey, the analysis of the survey, the interviews from my home in Kitchener. That land is actually held down, cared for, loved, and stewarded by the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the neutral people. The reason I'm taking a moment to acknowledge that is because a lot of the work that I've done in equity have included I've had the privilege of working with elders in community in Waterloo Region, who taught me that the land acknowledgement is more than just what we read on that page. What they've asked of me is to, every time I participate in a land acknowledgement, is to take a moment and provide a reflection on why that land acknowledgement matters. In that case, what they've said to me is, look, you know that you're often on stolen land while you're doing your work. How does that impact the actual conversation that you're about to have? And when I was sitting actually at a beautiful hotel in the municipality, I was thinking a lot about the fact that Indigenous community members have stressed that we need to have truth before we can get to reconciliation. Without that difficult engagement with truth, we can't actually move forward. And so when I think about the report that I'm about to deliver and the conversations that I've heard and the nuances in those conversations, I think that it's really important for us as leaders and community to be courageous enough to hear that truth, as messy as it is, as difficult as it is, but as real as it is, in order for us to move to the next phase, which I would argue from a lot of what I heard from both the surveys and the community conversations was a space of healing. And so with that, we can go to the next slide again. We're going to sit on this slide for a little bit, but I just have to give you a little bit of a backdrop before I move us forward. What I've done in my own notes is I've made some references to particular page numbers. I know the report is lengthy, but what I will do is sort of direct you along the report to certain pages. And since it's recorded, it'll be a little bit easier to follow along. If you go to pages 3 to 8 of the report, that's sort of the high-end context that I've provided. I've provided the purpose, the history, and the process that we took for to engage meaningfully with community. I think it's really important to take stock of the numbers of the people that we spoke to, because the numbers, the people that actually did participate in engagement, also tell a story. So with the survey, there were 475 survey participants. Um, the participation in the survey was anonymous. And what a lot of people don't know, and I wanted to make sure council was aware of, was that I never had access to the back end of that survey. What I was provided with was a document that had the question and a bunch of point form comments for everybody who answered, which means there were layers upon layers of ways to ensure confidentiality. And in fact, for some folks, it was 475 community members who participated. Some believed that it would be possible, I'm assuming, that it would be possible for me to connect their response to, let's say, question 1 to their response to question 2. But because of the layers of confidentiality that we put into the process, I wasn't able to do that. Every single question was just a bunch of point form comments. But that also meant that this ended up being near 600 pages of survey results. I don't know why I'm laughing. I think it's wonderful that we engaged that much. But it was over 600 pages of comments for each of, like, for this entire survey process. And it was near impossible for me to be able to figure out who was saying what. One thing that we did ask, however, was for anybody in the municipality who wanted to engage with me directly one-on-one. We provided my email address to ensure that they had access to me that way. There were less than 5 people that actually emailed me directly. When we had the community conversations where people got to meet me and speak to me in that forum, there were a handful more people that would follow up with something. But usually those follow-ups were a consequence of something that they had mentioned and I needed or I was requesting more information about. So for instance, if somebody mentioned an article in the local paper, I would have asked them, oh, could you please send that to me? And then that would be the email that I received, as opposed to people using that as a vehicle to reach me to provide more information. On page 6, you'll see there's a discussion about how robust the engagement was, or the solicitation of feedback for the survey was. And then it's also repeated again at the top of the section on the actual survey. It's also important to emphasize that we created a dedicated web page for this whole process, so that we could provide a space where we could give updates as they happened. And some of those frequently asked questions and updates that we provided were based on what we were hearing. So while there was, I would argue, method to my madness in the way that we created the process, there was also an openness with which we could respond to community in the way that they needed. And so when we started to receive the same question repeatedly, or when, for instance, Lori would receive emails with the same question, we would then develop a response that we would put up on that website. That site was also used to remind people of deadlines. And at the end of the closing of the survey, we created another space where people could still respond. So we tried really hard to make sure that as conversations were happening, if people had other comments that they wanted to get to me, that they could find a way to do so in this sort of anonymous fashion. It's also interesting that the survey, because we were very clear that it was confidential and that the responses would be anonymous, that also means on the flip side that community knew that they were speaking to me. And so, again, I say we take a deep breath about this, because there's over 600 pages of people speaking directly to me under a guise of anonymity. And what that looked like in practice was people being very open about how they felt on all sides of all issues. Sometimes the information that I read was difficult to read. And part of that difficulty was because I knew that people knew that they were speaking directly to me. I chose, and this is just because I remain an eternal optimist, to believe that even the more difficult comments that I received were spirited and passionate. And so I will hold that to the very end of this process. Sometimes that passion did not read as kindness, but I do believe that what that indicates through me to you is that there are a lot of desires of who community members want to be, what kinds of issues they hold dear that are attached to the discussion about the Secord monument. And we'll get into more detail about that, but I did think it was important to note that the anonymity meant that in that space where I was not able to tell who was speaking to me or follow up with them or ask any other questions, was also a space that created a lot of tension and held a lot of difficult conversations. When it comes to the community conversations where I was actually speaking with participants, we had 29 community members speak to me, but on page 6 of the report, you'll also see that there's a little bit of a complicated narrative around how we got to the 29 people. Very high level, we had about 26 people who had signed up, and days before we were supposed to start in April, people started to decided they no longer wanted to speak to me. We got to a place where there were only 5 or 6 people. The original plan was for me to come into town for April 18th and 19th and host these conversations in person. With 5 or 6 people, I thought that that was a waste of resources and funding for you folks to have me come in to not even know if the 5 or 6 people would still want to speak to me at that time, because we were very close to that deadline. We flipped to virtual, and I also made a decision that we would open up an opportunity for people to speak to me one-on-one. Now, in the original way that we thought of those conversations, they were very direct. Unlike the survey that was supposed to be a broad exploration of what people thought, these original April community conversations were supposed to help better inform me about the expertise in communities. So we were looking at heritage groups. I was looking to speak to equity-seeking groups. I was looking to speak to folks in community who had a good sense of the history of the monument. But even those larger groups were starting to feel a little bit worried about speaking to me directly in a forum that would now have me know who they are, and we were all sitting in a room together. I would argue that a lot of the reason for that tension was because at the same time that that was happening, there was a rise of rancor online. Some of the public forums where some of that tension was rising were being overseen by the municipality, so on some of their Facebook channels, etc. But there was a lot of tense discussions around the monument that were happening outside of spaces where council would not be responsible for those comments. And one of the pieces of feedback that we were receiving as people were choosing to not come and speak to me was that they were worried that they were going to be subjected to the same kind of judgment and harsh engagement if they came to speak to me in person. And they really did want to be able to tell me the truth about how they felt, but they felt that they'd have to be more guarded. As my mummy says, my parents are from Jamaica, and as my mummy says, we'll stick a pin in that. I'll come back to that momentarily. So when it comes to some of these key issues, the first that I have on this slide are the tensions in the online public forums. I would be remiss if I spoke about this as it was past tense, because overnight, tonight, leading up to me being here today, those tensions have mounted again. Like many tensions when it comes to anything that can touch on addressing race and racism in community, there's ebbs and flows. And you are currently, in my humble opinion, in a wonderful flow of difficult conversations happening in the public space. What's important to note is that as those tensions rise, it's not only that the decision for council becomes more difficult because you are holding people and their needs with great care, but there's also a very big possibility that the conversation that you believe you're having about the Secord monument is actually not the conversation that you are engaging in. I would argue humbly that the conversation that is happening for council to engage with is deeper than just the Secord monument. I'm going to come back to this, but there have been discussions, for instance, online just last night that equated this conversation about the monument to lynching. At the same time that a lot of the conversations that were coming up, even in the survey and again in some of the community conversations, have been speaking about the need to engage in some form of an educational program that allows people in the municipality of Kincardine to better understand the history of Black community members in the US and in the Canadian space, because Black history spans the border that we have. And so I think it's really important, and again, I promise I will come back to that, to pay very close attention to the rise of tension in that online space. The other two issues that were top of mind in the midst of this process and remain so now is the differing understanding of what is actually at issue in the decision that council is going to make in the future. For some folks, the question that you're engaging in is around racism and inclusion. I'm going to take a minute a little bit later in the presentation to separate out discussions about race from discussions about racism. Those are two very different discussions. So just another stick a pin moment. But for some folks, the conversation around the Secord monument is about race and inclusion, or racism and inclusion. For other people, it's about a preservation of history. And in my humble opinion, again, based on what I've heard and based on my own experiences, there's also a conversation about whether or not it can be both. Because I do believe that there's some of the tensions exist because leaders are being asked to choose one or the other. You must choose to preserve history, or you must choose inclusion. And I would argue that as we learn more about history, we can choose inclusion and preserve history and preserve the complicated and nuanced nature of the way history functions in the world. And the final tension is actually around transparency, and transparency in particular about particularly about how council plans to make the final decision. And some of those questions have arisen in public forums, but they also did come up quite a few times in the conversation. When people realized that my task was not to provide recommendation, the question came up, well, how is council then going to make the final decision about the monument? And so with that as the backdrop, what I'm going to do next is move us into my overview, first of the survey results, and then some of the themes from the community conversations. Thank you. So now we're at page 8 to 9 of the report. So there's on 8 and 9 of this report, you'll see an overview of the survey, the structure, details of why we had demographic data, why that was needed in shaping this. What I'd like to do is take just a little bit of time to talk about the importance of the demographic data collection. If you look at page 10 and 11 of the report, that's where you'll see the analysis of the demographic data that was collected. The way in which these questions about race and ethnicity were engaged suggests, and I've written this into the report, that the municipality is actually grappling with an understanding of why race matters. That would be from an outside person looking in. I believe that there are a lot of questions about that. On page 11 in particular, I provide a high-level explanation of this, including emphasizing that the Ontario Human Rights Commission helps organizations to collect demographic data because race matters. And so the question becomes, what can we do with this information and where can we go for support as we're doing this? I think for me, the takeaway really is that leadership currently is needed to help the community better understand how race operates. And this is where my first pin has now been unstuck. Race, which is an organizing principle in the way that a lot of spaces are organized, um, is something that a lot of people felt we could not talk about, because if we talked about race, then we were in fact being quote unquote racist. But there is a difference between racism and about race. And so race helps it. When we talk about race, we're talking about how the systems organize and how we see each other in different ways. Whether we agree with that organizing principle or not, a lot of organizations like the Ontario Human Rights Commission argue race exists in the world. So we have to start to understand how it is organized and what it is doing and how it's functioning in this particular space. Racism is an active use of those race distinctions to have and create hierarchies. And that's when you're using the principle of race to actually have power over other people. That distinction, as theoretical and high level as it seems, was something that was actually being collapsed for a lot of people in the municipality of Kincardine in my conversations, and in particular in the survey results. But because of that, it was shutting down an opportunity for us to talk about how different our experiences are in this place. And if we shut down these conversations, similar to when people are saying you can't change history, which was another big theme, if we shut down difficult conversations, then we can't actually get to that place of healing. And so, again, I would strongly encourage us to take a deep breath and take seriously some of the teachings that we've had from Indigenous elders who talk about reconciliation and say that you need truth to get to that place of reconciliation. When it comes to a situation like this, where you folks are sitting in leadership positions in a community that is grappling with how race operates and the potential of racism operating in the same space, there has to be some kind of a discussion around the truth before we can get to that space of healing. I also want to take another second to acknowledge that I, as a former elected official, know that these conversations aren't easy in a different way than most people know. When I was a member of provincial parliament in Kitchener Centre, I held I would have various issues arise with people holding various views very passionately in community. But leadership that they were asking for, the reason that they had elected me, and I would argue the reason that you have been elected, is because people are looking to you in this position of leadership to be a model for doing this work differently. And that's where I feel like I can provide you with a different interpretation of what's happening. And that different interpretation, in my humble opinion, again, is that there's an opportunity that is hidden inside these very difficult conversations, especially those that are happening in the public space. People are looking for an example of how we can navigate through this. And I truly, truly believe that it is possible for us to engage deeply with the kinds of concerns that people have, and that we can do so in a way that will model for the public a respectful engagement, even across difference. So what I've done for the next couple slides, and I'm not going to go into all of them with great detail, but I'm happy to go backwards if anybody has questions, is I've pulled out the themes that were developed from the survey. At the end of each theme, in the report, you'll see that I've also put a series of questions. Those questions were developed not so much for the public to engage with, but more for elected officials to engage with, so they can start to think about how they take the feelings of the public and find a way to speak to those or incorporate those in the decisions that they make. I also, again, can't help but reiterate that the decisions that you make in order to address what's happening in the municipality, go well beyond what happens with the monument. there are decisions and opportunities for you to make bigger opportunities for learning and education and engagement that do speak to the needs that I believe came out through the survey. I've put in bold in the presentation some of my favorite questions in the list of questions that I've provided. So I'll make sure to I'll go through one or two right now, and then I'll just sort of point to those as we move forward. So for the first survey theme, this is on pages 13 to 15 of the report. That first theme was concerns about bias in the process. I must be very honest, it was fascinating to make this the first theme because it was me talking about myself in the third person, something that I find fun to do. However, it came out so often that I couldn't ignore that theme. The question around bias in the process was coming from various places, but if you look at what I've put into bold on the slide, this question is one that I think it's important of all the questions for council to consider. If people in the municipality of Kincardine are worried that speaking about race means that they are being quote unquote racist, how can council continue to engage meaningfully in a discussion about experiences of racism in the municipality? And that to me goes back to, it was brought up a lot in the survey and it was brought up a lot in the community conversations, the need for some form of education. That said, sometimes we think as council, we've got sort of limits on what we can are tasked to do. And I believe that there's opportunities there for us to think about the kinds of tools that you have available to help people understand this distinction. I'm also of the opinion that when people have more clarity about that, their opinion about what's happening with the monument might also shift, because what will be at the center will be people and their needs as opposed to the monument, and what that has meant. So that was one of the big pieces for me. With the second theme, fear of quote unquote woke ideologies, and woke was the language that was used within the survey. There are a couple different things. I want to make sure that I say on record that what's happening in the municipality is not only happening in the municipality of Kincardine. There's a discussion around quote unquote woke ideologies that's happening across the board. I would argue across the province, across the country, and around the world. And that language is being used in a particular way. One of the questions that I had that I've also put in bold: how might council assist community in better understanding that the conversations about the Secord monument and the consequent response, especially those made in public, has now resulted in a decision that's larger than simply deciding what to do with the second Secord monument. I do believe that it's important for us to take seriously what is happening in that broader space that has us concerned about quote unquote wokeness, when there's a history behind that language as well. And part of that, just high level, and happy to come back to it if folks have questions, is that there was a time where a lot of people of color, and Black folks in particular, used the word woke to represent a recognition of how the system operates. So as they were experiencing anti-Black racism, they were trying to figure out why this was happening, and they started to see patterns in the way that the systems were operating around them. And so there was like a colloquial way of speaking about that. They'd say, you're woke, you've woken up, you have awakened to understanding that system. Today, that language has been flipped. And some would argue, I would argue, that it's been co-opted, that language, and it means something different. The question becomes, I mean, council can choose to engage with this particular dialogue as much or as little as they'd like. But I do think it's important to know that within the municipality, there are a lot of people who are concerned about wokeness, but not in its original form. They're concerned about this new vision of what woke means. And that new vision of what it means is something that I do think we have to take some time to think about. So the other question that I've put in bold, what might be needed to help bridge the gap between those who worry about, quote, woke ideologies, end quote, and those that interpret woke as an awakening to new ideas, fresh opinions about the world and that structure. So again, happy to speak more about that. And oh, I forgot to tell you what page that was on, but that part around the woke ideologies, fear of woke ideologies, is on pages 16 to 18 of the report. So we can move to the next slide. The third theme from the survey, call to share clear decision-making criteria. I've just highlighted, this is on page 19 to 22 of the report. I cannot remember if I said this out loud, so I'm going to say it out loud again, just in case. If you've heard it already, close your ears. If it's new information, congrats. In this section of the report, under each theme, I did use quotes. Those quotes are coming directly from the survey. The reason I did that was because of the layers of confidentiality and anonymity that were embedded in the process. What I was worried about was that if I gave you themes without providing something to support those themes, you could leave thinking that I had just made up the themes. And so what I did was I pulled out key examples that supported that theme. I cannot tell you if all of the examples come from one person, two people, five people, or all 475, but I can tell you that I had a very extensive chart of how many times I was hearing the same idea, and then I finessed the theme that goes into the report based on that. So just so that you know, those quotes that are in there, they are in fact from the survey. And I left them as clean to that survey as possible. On the flip side, when it comes to the community conversations, because there were smaller numbers of people, and I had promised that I would not be quoting people directly unless I asked and I was given that permission. In those little boxes, when we get to that section, I have paraphrased what I heard. And so I have the information that I have, like the interviews that we did, but those are not direct quotes. Those are my paraphrased, high level understanding of what they were saying to support those themes. So with the call to share clear decision-making criteria, I've just highlighted one issue that did come up often. How can council ensure that the rise of tensions between us versus them, or those with deeper roots in the municipality of Kincardine and those who are newer to the community, begin to build bridges to work together in creating a caring community where everyone can thrive? Might council be able to serve as a model for this critical exchange across ideological differences for the rest of the municipality to see and learn from? This was a very interesting question for me. It's also a very interesting theme, because what I was finding, especially in the conversations that ensued after, was that the notion of us versus them, a lot of longtime residents were very unhappy with things that you didn't anticipate them being unhappy about. And so more specifically, there's an assumption that I was hearing, again, from somebody who's outside of the community, that if you were a long-term resident, you loved the Dr. Secord statue or the monument, and you would have no problem with the inscription. I was actually hearing very nuanced opinions about that. I had a lot of people who were long-term residents who said in the survey, I'm a long-term resident. If this inscription is hurting people, then it shouldn't be there. I also had people who were newer, the assumption was if you were newer, that you might not care about it or something to that effect. I had the opposite of everything that you would have assumed happened came out in varied nuances. And I think, again, because of the anonymity, people were more willing to tell me some of the sort of backdrop upon which they were having these opinions. I just wanted to point that out because that's again, to me, it's a hidden opportunity in this discussion and dialogue. The fourth theme, this is pages 23 to 27 of the report, We Can't Erase History. That was repeated over and over and over again. But there was also a nuance with which that was repeated. It wasn't that everybody who believed that the monument with the inscription as is should remain, that thought that we can't erase history. A lot of people who felt troubled by the inscription of the second Secord monument also believed that we can't erase history. And the go-to from that space was to request some form of an educational program that would help us to navigate difficult histories. And so from the place of leadership that you sit, there's an opportunity here to address this notion of what do we do with difficult histories. And there are a lot of people who are trying to navigate the same as we learn more about the impact of some of the decisions that leaders have made, and move into new spaces. So we can go on to the next slide. The fifth, um, the fifth theme is on page 28 to 31 of the report. Roots of racism must be meaningfully addressed. I've just highlighted, should the number of complaints guide the process aimed to address the root causes of racism, or is it the nature of the complaint that takes more precedence and pushes council to act? I wanted to take a second just to unpack that a little bit to make sure that there was clarity. There were some folks that wanted to know if there was a huge number of complaints about the Secord monument, and as a consequence, then perhaps their decision about what should happen might shift. But when you're talking about equity and inclusion, it's not usually the number of complaints that you're looking at, it's the depth or the impact of the thing in question or of the experience in question. And so I wanted to put that before council in the report so that there could be some kind of a discussion about that. Because I do know also from my own experience as a former elected official, people are always asking me, how many emails did you get? How many letters was it a large number of people? And then they would, determine whether or not you should act. Or if it was one person, was that you wasting time and energy in that leadership position? And so I'm happy to speak a little bit more about that when it opens up for questions, but I did want to point that out. On pages 35 of the report, and I don't think I wrote the end, but anyway, learning from history requires accurate historical records. This was a question that came up often in the survey, and it did come up again in some of the conversations. There are myths around the Secord monument and around the role that Dr. Secord played. There's also truths that we know. And there are a lot of questions about the accuracy of all of the records. And so that theme was important, at least from my vantage point, because a lot of people were asking to learn from history, but we can't learn from history unless we have a sense of how accurate the records are, or clarity about what that is. So is it primary source? Is it secondary source? Those kinds of questions were ones that kept coming up. What I put in bold, given the nuances of history when told from the perspective of those enslaved and brought to Canadian soil, how might council help educate community members in the municipality of Kincardine about the challenges faced by Black community members post-emancipation from slavery and during the rise of Jim Crow? The reason I've highlighted that particular question, twofold, to be honest. The first is because we can speak very generally about racism, or we can be very specific and actively try to address it. In the specificity, we have to be clear about what type of racism we're talking about or what type of issues we're talking about. I was thinking about this actually while I was waiting for the council meeting to begin. In other municipalities, I think I had said this when I first met everybody virtually, the issues around the John A. Macdonald statues and monuments that exist all over the place, that might be an issue that some folks see as us having to grapple with quote unquote racism. But the reality is we're talking about anti-Indigenous sentiment. So that is a type of racism, but it's not racism in general terms. The reason why this is important is because unless you acknowledge that, the solution that you come up with to try to address that type of racism will never do the thing that you're hoping it will do. And so in this particular case, when it comes to the Dr. Secord monument, the type of racism that keeps coming up, uh, literally as of even overnight tonight, has been anti-Blackness. And what that means is that if you do go the route of some form of an educational program, if you're trying to figure out what type of history we're looking for, you don't want to just have general programs around racism and talk about things that aren't actually speaking to the root of the conversation you're having right now. You need to speak about Black history, what that's looked like on this soil, what it still looks like, because we're always makers of history. In this particular case, I made sure to include some information around Jim Crow in the report, because the end of enslavement did not mean the end of the maltreatment of Black community members on the soil. And it started to shift in different ways. And so now that would be the kind of historical accuracy that you would be looking for in a situation like this. The other part of the historical records that people were asking for were directly related to what do we know or not know about Dr. Secord? Is this true that we know this is truth and here's the proof? Or is it something that we believe to be true? Before I move on to the next slide, I just want to also make sure that I say on record, there's a list of resources at the end of the report. Historians often express difficulty with doing their work as historians because you believe something to be true and then new records pop up and then you realize that what you thought was true is actually not true. So there will always be a space that you have to hold for the truth to be challenged. And for new records to pop up that might change your interpretation of things. And so with that, I think one of the strong calls from community was to get at least a cursory sense of what do we have accurate records for and what do we not? What would we hope to find to have a better sense of the history of Dr. Secord? We'll go to the next slide. The seventh theme from the survey, honoring ancestors in the municipality of Kincardine. I've highlighted the following. How might council help educate the community on inclusion in a way that allows them to co-create community spaces and better understand council's decisions to become intentional creators of caring and inclusive communities? I wanted to, this particular theme is on page 36 and 37 of the report. I just wanted to point out that a lot of times, and maybe around this table it is different, but a lot of times when we speak about ancestors, we don't think that we're speaking about white community members. A lot of times when we're speaking about race, we don't think we're speaking about white community members. And I just want to point out that when we talk about race and how race has been used, we're talking about white folks, we're talking about Black folks, we're talking about Indigenous people, the list can go on. Because race is an organizing category. When we talk about ancestors, it's often been assumed that we're only speaking about a particular group of people. So we're only speaking about Indigenous folks when we talk about ancestry, or we're only speaking about Black people when we're talking about our elders. But what I found in my communications, both in the survey and also with the community conversations, was that there were a whole segment of community members in Kincardine who have deep roots in the community and who worried that the work of inclusion would leave them behind. And so one of the things that I do think is important for leaders in the community to do is to make sure that if you're doing inclusion work, that you are not leaving people behind, and that folks that do have deep roots in community are held with care and compassion as we're navigating various changes in the demographics in community, but also in the ways that we're understanding our history now, as well as holding the needs of other folks in the community. I hope that that was clear, but I'm always happy to go back. The final theme for the survey was identity and the municipality of Kincardine today. I've just highlighted the following. Given that monuments are not the only ways that community members are celebrated, what other types of celebrations of local people might council support to ensure that diverse communities are honored in more official capacities? I'm going to ask that we all take a very deep breath because I have to say something out loud. When I originally put this in bold, I did not have all of the information about what was going on online overnight. And this was already in the report, so this is direct from the report. And I should have told you that this theme is on page 38 and 39 of the report. This particular question was also a consequence of people speaking about the beautiful, the painting, the Afrocentric mural that exists in the municipality. Since the time that I've put this in bold, however, there have been questions about whether or not that mural should remain. There have been questions about concerns that, you know, if things don't go a particular way, something might happen to said mural. The reason I'm pausing just to say this is because one of the things that I heard consistently in the survey, and also when people were courageous enough to speak to me, is that there is a tendency to only commemorate certain people, usually older, usually white, usually male. And that some people were quite happy that we were starting to see a shift. And they spoke about that particular mural, the Afrocentric mural, as an example. Since that time, however, people have raised questions about the mural, and people are concerned about the safety of said mural, like of it being preserved as opposed to defaced. I'm not going to say much more about that at the moment, but I do think it's important on record for me to raise that this situation is live. It's not, I just did a report and everything is great. Or as they say in the Lego movie, everything is awesome. We are not there at the moment. At the moment, we're at a place where some of the work towards inclusion is being questioned. I would argue that this is still an opportunity because as leaders in the community, you can find ways to express why this work is so important, and you can use the tools that you have available to do that work. You can also choose to not do that. You can choose to not believe that that work is important, but whichever way you go, people will be looking to you as leaders in community to figure out what our next steps are, and the stakes are actually quite high. And on that note, we move on with this presentation to the next slide. I'm not going to spend as much time on this because, to be honest, it was wonderful to see that even among the 29 people that I spoke to, that the same themes that had come out of the survey were reflected back to me in these conversations. Just a little bit more nuance because people could go into different places. But the key themes, the first for the community conversations, oh, yes. There's general notes about the community conversations on page 40 and 43 of the report. So I always give sort of an overview of what happened, why it happened, et cetera. The questions that I offered to people in those conversations are listed on page 42 and 43. The questions were sent out ahead of time so that people had an opportunity to reflect on the questions. Everybody was asked the same questions. However, before the conversations began, the community conversations began, I had already started to do some of the analysis of the survey results, and there were tensions, as I said before, online. I developed another question, like an extra question, and at the beginning of every one of the interviews, I explained to everybody, you've already received all of the questions. There'll be one surprise question. Here it is. If you don't want to answer it, by all means, you can ignore it because people might want that time to reflect. Everybody chose to answer it. And I think part of it was just that we created an environment where people felt comfortable enough to engage with me in that way, which was lovely. So the first theme, the need for community healing, is on page 44 to 48. And again, a reminder that for this section, anything that's in those little boxes in the report are my paraphrasing. The participants, I have a sense of who everybody is, but the coding document is not kept with the report, so there's no way for people to put those things together. And so we've got the first theme, need for community healing. The second, pages 49 to 51 of the report, was the centering of Black voices. Many people said that, and it goes back to my explanation around race and racism. In this particular scenario, Black community members are the ones that are mostly impacted by that history of enslavement, and by the understanding and or lack of understanding of the reasons and rationale for the American Civil War. As a consequence, they should be centered in this conversation. The third theme, pages 42 to 50 or 52 to 53 of the report, challenges tying identity to a legend, myth, or historical recollection. Number 4 was the municipality we want to be. Again, that notion of a vision of who we are and looking to the future was prominent. That's on pages 54 to 56. The fifth theme, learn more, do better. That was one of my favorite themes because it's literally what we always have to do, right? We learn new things about what's happening. We have an opportunity to do better. So it spoke to my internal optimist. That is on page 57 to 59 of the report. And the last theme was navigating complicated histories. That is found on page 60 to 61 of the report. We can go to the next slide, which is, these are just my final thoughts. These are in no particular order. But let me begin by letting folks know that on pages 62 to 67 of the report, I have a section called Moving Forward, Challenges and Opportunities. So there I provide some reflections, just sort of high level, based on everything that I've heard. Here are some things that I think council might benefit from hearing. 68 and 69 of the report, I also offer some resources. Those resources, for instance, like some historians that do really good work in this area, et cetera, are there based on those final thoughts. But I wanted to just raise 4 last things, and then I promise I open it up for questions. The first I've reiterated, and I must reiterate again, this isn't about race or racism in general terms. The conversations that are happening right now in the municipality are about the role of Black folks in this community, the space that they play, what their needs are. And it's very much attached to an idea of how Black people have been treated historically. When I say that, I don't mean historically like last week. I mean, the history of Black community members has been one that began with our humanity being denied and being legislated as property. And while that may not, although I would argue it did actually happen here too, it's not understood as part of the Canadian historical record. The reality is that there are a load of historians who have done work on different ways in which Black people on Canadian soil, both before it was called Canada and when it was Upper and Lower Canada, and then again, once it became Canada, were dehumanized by legislation. And so when it comes to that level of dehumanizing of a people, it stands to reason that when we have discussions that try to dismiss that part of the history, there will be tensions that exist. The second thought that I wanted to leave you with was around the online posts. I've raised it before, and I did promise I would come back to it, and I'm happy to have discussions with folks around this notion of the use of the word lynching in some of the posts that happened last night, very late in the evening. And again, I know it's not an easy conversation, and you likely didn't come to work today thinking this is what you would be talking about, but here we are. The idea of lynching, if seen through the lens of Black experiences, is one where your physical body, you were physically murdered in public because of being Black and not doing whatever that role was for you. People were lynched if they didn't look down when a white person was walking by them on a sidewalk. People were lynched if they were accused of stealing something, whether they stole it or not didn't matter. their physical body was mutilated often. There were public ceremonies where they would celebrate these. They had postcards that put those indignities on record. These are real examples of a dehumanizing experience in our history. When we use that kind of language and are speaking about the potential of undermining the goodness of a doctor who worked in this community, there is an erasure of the depth of pain associated with that term for a large portion of people in the community. The reason I say that is that even if there are a small handful of Black people that live in your community, I can tell you from the survey as well as from the community conversations that many people believed in the dignity of Black experiences and a desire to hold Black people with care, love, and compassion. And so when we start to do this kind of erasure, we're hurting a lot more people than just a handful of Black community members in community. You're hurting a huge number of people. I, again, can totally speak more about it, but also want to offer, just as an ongoing offer to people, an opportunity for one-on-one conversations with me about any of the things that I have said or any other questions that arise. The conversations are really not easy, and while I know the municipality is bound by particular rules to host certain conversations in public, I also think as leaders, we are rarely offered an opportunity to sit down with somebody and just talk through what we don't know. There is an assumption that we need to know everything, but we don't know these histories. There are Black activists that to this day are fighting for Black history to be incorporated into our school system because we don't incorporate this information. And so there's no way for folks to know, in my humble opinion, that the Underground Railroad was not actually a train, that the Underground Railroad was a litany of people who decided we were not going to accept enslavement in this way. We're going to help people find freedom, and we will open up our homes no matter what the cost to ensure that people can make it from where they are now to a place where they feel safer. That kind of knowledge around the role of the Underground Railroad, the fact that the Underground Railroad's existence was a sign that there was racism in community, not a sign that there was no racism in community, was something that also I believe needed unpacking from the survey results that we received. And this use of the word lynching in this particular way was another example to me of the importance of a deeper type of education that's needed. That actually is my third point. It's about education. I really want to make sure that I reiterate that anything that is new information for folks is new information because it's new information. We aren't teaching about this. And so now, again, it's an opportunity for you to be in a leadership position and demonstrate that we don't know everything even as leaders, but we're courageous enough to ask the questions that will help us. The very last point before I open it up to questions is around thinking about the limitations of council. What I know from my own role as an elected official is that the public often thought that I could do things that I was not allowed to do, right? Yeah, there were a lot of things that people thought I could do. And to be honest, I was newly elected in 2018. I too thought I could do many things and then was told, oh, you can't do that. And so there are a lot of things that the public believes we can do that we can't do. But when we have situations like this, where community is in need of something that goes beyond what we are allowed to do, I believe that it is incumbent on us as leaders to find the partnerships that can do the work that go beyond the scope of what we can do. And so I wanted to sort of end my thoughts with that idea as well. When we come to a place where we're like, okay, but council can't do this, then the next question can be, so who can do that? Who can hold the community with the care that they need? In other situations, we often do this. If council or if an organization finds out that there's violence in the household, maybe the leader of said organization can't do anything to address that, but they can call the people who have that expertise and who can step in. And we would do that naturally. And I want us to become elected officials who also do the same thing. And it might be a partnership that's internal to the organization. It might be an area that can take this work on, but that has to be fully invested in and devoted to doing that work. Or it might be an organization outside. And so that's where, again, I go back to the resources on pages 68 and 69 of the report, where you at least have like a starting point to start thinking about that. Thank you again for listening. We can go to the last slide. It's just my picture, but I'm right here, so you don't need to look at that. And by all means, I'm ready for any questions that you might have.
Dr. Lindo, thank you so much for that further explanation of the report. It was a hard read for many good reasons, but through it all, the municipality of Kincardine, with your encouragement to this leadership team, will end up in a better spot than we were yesterday and the day before that. So thank you so much for that. Members of council, any questions that you would like to pose to Dr. Lindo? Deputy Mayor Clark.
I think I start off, Dr. Lindo, by thanking you for your diligence in the comprehensive report. What I was able to take from reading the report was understanding better some of the differing perspectives. What appeared perhaps at first glance as hurtful and harmful comments was less so done with intent. As I read through the report, I understood the basis of those who have placed a significance on the preservation of history, who have signified that for them preserving history not only has been important for the community that they know, but equally important for a part of their identification and how they identify themselves. I equally took from that another perspective. One of voices that were saying, we're not trying to cancel your culture, nor could we. We're not trying to eradicate your history, nor could we. But understand that when you seek to preserve your history in a certain framework, without proper context, legitimizing certain aspects that we perhaps look at now in horror, you do so, and you may be successful in preserving that legacy, but at the cost of another group having to relive the trauma of their own legacy. I also heard a lot through the report about the attempts of changing history. And I took the view that we all know that history can't be changed, whether the monument goes back to where it was, whether it's recontextualized or whether it's removed, history will stay the same. The monument in itself is a repository for history, not history itself. However, what I perhaps underestimated to a certain extent prior to your presentation and the reading of the report was I had looked at this discussion around the monument not based on race. I have to say I was blindsided by some of the comments. I looked at it really based upon our relationship with history, how we commemorate, memorialize, and what we legitimize in terms of the aspects of history. When the comments turned to being about a division in relation to race, I actually saw those as disingenuous to a certain extent. I saw it as making this discussion no longer about our relationship with history, but seeking to divide the community based on race. The comments, which were pejorative and inflammatory, both in relation to the reporting of some of these comments as well as online, was disheartening. What I thought, however, was commendable was a community at large that remained united in rising above the discussion concerning race. For most of this community, and for those who've engaged meaningfully in this exercise, I'm grateful. For me, it was a learning experience. I equally am grateful for the community that has stood up and said, we will be inclusive. And that is the majority of this community. They have been overly welcoming for those who are newcomers, overly generous. They understand that the discussion is a challenging one, but they have risen above it and they continue to rise above it. When I read through this report, for those who on either side of this discussion didn't take the opportunity to speak to others who had perhaps a different lived experience, I thought it was a missed opportunity. It's very easy to continue to engage with those who've had similar lived experiences. But it's to understand and know that the world we live in is bigger than the street you live on. And without speaking and trying to understand, I really do wonder whether we've learned much from history. That being said, I was encouraged with regards to the desire for healing and further education. I think those are two aspects that those who sit around this council table will take heart with. Knowing that we don't represent any one demographic in this community, we represent every demographic, irrespective of race, religion, ethnicity. And when people talk about having a vote, it is very hard to give equal weight to those who don't have an equal voice. So I'm forever grateful for the report that's been written and for what we can take from it. Thank you.
Councillor Henchberger, please.
Thank you to you, Mayor. Again, thank you for your work. Bringing people together is hard, and I appreciate what you do. Frankly, I don't know how you can do it repetitively without a lot of breaks in between. I've more of a practical question. I heard a lot of themes about people looking for the leadership of this council. Theme also about conversations and education. And I'm wondering if there's sort of a subtlety in there about whether practically council, in the way that the Municipal Act allows, should be trying to step out into the public and provide some of this leader via engagement opportunities with members of the public. Interested in what your thoughts are about that.
Through you, Mayor, to the councillor, it's such an important question because, and again, I'm answering it from my former space when I was an elected official. One of the things that I realized in that capacity, because I was also the anti-racism critic for the province, was that when it came to addressing racism in a practical way, so I would have, for instance, I would get phone calls from neighbors who were having a fight. One neighbor was calling the police on the other neighbor who's Black, and the first neighbor who was white would contact me, and then the other neighbor would contact me, and then I would find myself embroiled in a neighbor's fight, even though I was a provincial representative whose job and role was not to do that work, right? I use that as an example because what I realized was that in all of the different levels of government, when it was any other issue other than race, we would rethink what some of the boundaries were for what we could do or what we couldn't do. So we would take a policy, for instance, and we would read it through and we would think about, okay, well, what could we do with this to be able to engage in this particular conversation? If it was about trying to find funding for a particular initiative that somebody wanted, if it was for trying to do a new build, I had issues where people were talking about transportation issues, and you would think creatively about the legislative constraints that existed around you. But when it came to addressing racism in community, I believe that the fear that is associated with being in a leadership position and not wanting to harm anybody stops us from thinking creatively about what those legislative constraints might actually be. As a consequence, some of the things that we would typically do to engage with community meaningfully, we now think we can't do because what we're talking about is race and racism. But counselors talk to community members all the time. So there's nothing in a rise of racism in community that necessarily stops us from that level of community engagement. Um, we make partnerships all the time. There's nothing necessarily in the request that community has for us right now that's stopping us from doing those kinds of engagement, having those kinds of engagements with community. But it's difficult because we aren't used to leveraging the legislation in the ways that we have, in your case with the Municipal Act, in a way that actually does this inclusion work. So what some municipalities have done is they've taken it upon themselves to ensure that they have equity policies so that they can rely on said policies should issues arise. So sometimes you'll see the equity statements that municipalities have or they put up on their website. Those equity statements underneath, the next step is to create policies that actually mobilize those statements. Some people will use the idea of equity like directives. It's not to direct your action, but it's to help council have more tools within the system that they're accustomed to, that they can draw on to do some of the work that's now being asked of them. But the other piece of this, and this likely comes from me, not so much as an or former elected representative, but more from my research background, is that many of these systems are created the way that they are so that you can't do this work. So it's not at a time where historically people of color were not even deemed to be people, then the elected representatives never had to deal with their issues because they weren't the people or their constituents anyway. But now we're in 2024 where we do care about a diverse group of people who have a diverse set of needs. And it stands to reason that some of the requirements of the Municipal Act will need to be revised, amended, explored, expanded, or read in conjunction with other pieces of legislation that also matter. So for instance, it will be very difficult for you to do the work that you do using the Municipal Act to address issues of racism, inclusion, or equity if you don't also do that work in conjunction with a reading of the Anti-Racism Act for the province. That act exists and it requires a whole ton of things of us. Or to read it in conjunction with the Ontario Human Rights Code. One of the interesting bits of learning that I did, because I knew there was a human rights code, but I didn't quite understand how it all worked. And I was lucky enough at one point to be sent to a training through Osgoode Law School around human rights and in Ontario. And one of the things that's always stood out for me is that we are supposed to mobilize that code proactively. We tend to mobilize it reactively. So somebody has something bad happen, and then we're like, wait a second, that's a violation. And then you try and do a process after the fact. But the actuality is that we are all not only leaders and elected officials, but everybody in community is supposed to be proactive with the code. And so now, if I go back to our role in these positions, no matter what the Municipal Act says, if you see the potential of a violation of the code, it's actually your duty is to act. It's incumbent upon you to move with your leadership in a way that actually supports the people that you're worried might be harmed. So that I hope that that answers the question, but I do think that part of what we have to do today is think very creatively about what we have always believed the constraints to be, what it is that our goals are, and what tools we actually need. Some are to be created, but some are also to just read things differently or in conversation with other pieces of legislation that also may not get the emphasis that they typically do. Like rarely do I have somebody just tell me that they read the Anti-Racism Act and here's what they're doing. But if you are one of those people, I'm your girl.
Councillor Stewart, please.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you very much. I haven't quite read the report 4 times yet, but I'm getting there. There's a lot of information for anybody to absorb. It has been very interesting. I'm looking forward to reading it the fourth, fifth time. And through the month of August, I'm very interested in engaging in the community and really see, because I'm hoping the council really needs to make a decision on this. And I think the mayor's already sort of said, we're hoping to do it in September, sort of time frame and everything, because I think it's important for the community to hear from their leaders, whether they agree or not. The report and what I've read and what I've seen on the website and on social media, we're going from here, let's put up the monument right where it is and just leave it there, or here, let's bury the thing in the cemetery. So I haven't really been able to find sort of that balance yet. And it's going to take us a little bit of while to find the balance, but I know that our learned council here will be working on it, and I'm hoping to have an answer for the community in September. Just to talking about groups, we have a group, especially in my area, the Amish group, that doesn't actually vote. So they don't really have a say on council, but I think our community has made them very inclusive. We're constantly talking to them and everything else. So overall, I give a community probably a plus. We're not perfect yet, but at least we're trying, and I think we're going in the right direction. So thank you very much, and it'll be an interesting August. Thank you.
Councillor Steinoff Gray, please.
Thank you, through you, Chair. First, I'd just like to thank you again for the report. I thought you did a really phenomenal job of representing multiple perceptions of the same issue, which I don't think was an easy task. I know it wouldn't have been easy. I don't even know if I could have done that. So I really have to give you my respect for that. I think you did a phenomenal job. I think for me, one of the important things to remember is that we are part of this community together. And it's really important that whatever decision we make, we consider everyone. So I would like to respond to that bias. You did not show any bias whatsoever. So thank you for disproving that concern that had been raised. I do want to appreciate that from you. The other piece that I would talk about that came back a lot of times was in what is fact and fiction. And there are so many different perceptions on who and what happened. And you know what I mean? Who is the man, the myth? And I have to recognize Councillor Hinchberger. The amount of effort that he's gone through, combing through files, reaching out to like sources in the States and the different levels of government to try to get the history written down. I think that I would like your guidance on how we start trying to make that publicly available and how we start to discern the fact from fiction, because there were so many questions and so many assumptions on what was fact, but I didn't necessarily see what the basis was in the proposition. I would really like your guidance on how we go about dealing with that, because you said truth is important. And so how do we get to the truth of the facts behind it?
Through you, Chair, to the councillor, that's such an important question as well. I would complicate it because it's who I am, and just add that there's truth in the stories too. So that something is a story, or that it's become a legend, that's also truth. It's not the same thing as fact. And so what I imagine in a world, like a perfect world, is that there would be a space where, like we do with other historical things, we put, this is factually true, and this is what we mean by factual. These are legends that we've heard about the person. Sorry, another stick a pin moment. I got very excited. Yesterday, at dusk, I got to hear the piper. right? I had never heard about this. I was like, what is happening? But I got to be out there and listen to it. And I read this story, this myth around. That's still somebody's truth, but we don't have enough information. I'm just going to take a guess. We don't have enough information to know all the details that go around. Did he really stand here? Did he play that song? Did he? But that still becomes somebody's truth. So if we apply that kind of a lens with the Phantom Piper to a situation like this, there's nothing wrong with the legends that we hold or the stories that our grandparents and great grandparents have told us, or there's nothing wrong with that. But I think the other nuance in what I was hearing was that because of the harm that's happening when we are pretending that this thing that is a story is actually a concrete fact, it's making us have to question what it is that we're doing and how we're doing it. So back to my perfect world, we would have a space where we could actually share that kind of information. It's a question of investment, whether or not that's something that's worth investing in, and whether it's council that leads that process or if it's somewhere else, because I was talking about partnerships before that would lead that process. Historians do this all the time. We're living history right now. We're creating what will become historical later. Some of it will get documented, but I'm sure there'll be many stories that the camera wasn't facing a certain person and somebody will have a mythical story about the look on their face when somebody said. So as those stories are being created, it's important for us to figure out how we can document that. So we can we can speak to museums and talk about how they do that kind of work. We can create portals where we actually share that information. It could, in fact, become a collaborative community building type project where people are sharing some of those legends and stories. I can tell you that for myself, one of the things that I miss the most, for instance, about my late dad is that he used to tell me stories that were coming from uh, my grandparents, my great grandparents. There needs to be a repository for that as well. And so there's one way to step into this position of leadership, recognizing that there is harm, et cetera, and also helping to document what we do know, what we don't know, with an open heart and knowing that people are just sharing the information that they have. And who knows if that might be one opportunity to sort of take things down a notch, to stay focused on where we do need the education, but also be honest. Again, I can't reiterate enough the amount of people that's recognized there. There are real tensions in the stories around why the American Civil War happened. Some people believe that the Civil War was a war fought because of a desire to keep slavery and to keep Black folks enslaved. Other people argue that it was about the freedom to be able to make their own decisions and separate themselves from the Union. Other people believe that it was a combination. But if we don't have that difficult conversation and we pretend that the United States border is like a real border, when really it's a fictitious place that we've decided this is where Canada begins and this is where the US begins. If we ignore the fact that many people from the US historically have come here to start their lives, we're missing an opportunity to have a better understanding of what happened there, and what happened here historically for us. Long-winded way of saying maybe a portal would be a cool place to put all the information.
Councillor Kavanaugh, please.
Thank you very much. And through the chair, first, I want to say thank you so much for being here tonight. I appreciate everything that you're doing for the community. It's not an easy task. You spoke briefly about the inappropriate social media posts that were made and some of the terms that were used. Now, I didn't read them firsthand. I was provided screenshots after the fact because our staff had already done their diligence and removed the offending posts as they came up. But in your opinion, knowing that there's going to be now personal attacks and frankly offensive things said on social media, do you feel it's better for the municipality to continue to engage online as they're currently doing? Because there has also been an argument made that it's better to make the communication one way and simply post information out and then disallow all comments and all correspondence or debate going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And, oh, I didn't say it properly. Through the chair to the counselor. Thank you. Um, so this is my personal opinion, based on nothing but being alive in 2024. It's really difficult to disengage yourselves from social media. And I remember having these very same conversations when I was an elected official. A lot of community members engage only on social with various levels of government. A lot of people don't at all, and we tend to do a better job of trying to find ways to work with the constituents and residents who aren't online than we are with the folks who are solely online. And so I don't know personally that uh, it would necessarily become best practice to try and disengage completely. I also believe that the stuff has already been said. And so if you try to disengage right now, it would be another example of kind of erasing harm that's already happened. So the disengagement online in and of itself will not repair the harm that's already been done. I also take very seriously these conversations around erasing history. And while we don't feel like last night at 11 was history, it actually is also history. And as the days and hours go, that will be something that we're trying to erase if we just sort of take it off. I do believe that it's important for us to remove comments that are harmful or that can potentially result in more harm. And so the personal attacks, et cetera, for the safety of constituents, it's important for us to remove that information. But it's also just as important for us as leaders to reach out to those who were named and make sure that they're okay. What that looks like is likely going to be different from community to community, from counselor to counselor, from council to council. But the removal in and of itself won't necessarily repair that harm. The other thought that I have is that in order for community to be in touch with us, the proverbial us. I'm pretending I'm elected, but I'm not really. But in order for community to be in touch with folks that are elected, they often have to go through some form of communication. Sometimes it's through social because they're trying to get your attention about something that's happened. Sometimes it's the emails that they're sending. They're doing various things. Sometimes it's through comment boxes that exist in certain places, right? So a change like that would be a major change. So you'd want to make sure that if that is a choice that council makes, that everybody is acutely aware then of how they actually communicate with you, because a lot of those means of communications are actually there for good purpose. Somebody abusing that system doesn't necessarily warrant removing that pathway to access, but maybe it does, which goes back to that original question that I had. Is it a lot of people that have to complain about something before council acts, or is it just one thing that has to happen before we shut it down? So I know I did not really answer your question. I don't want to pretend like I did. I did not. But it does raise a lot of concerns. Before I turn the mic off, though, what I do want to reiterate is that the harm is real, and so is the need for deeper understanding of why it was even harmful. I think that it may be difficult to hear this, but we are not all starting from the same understanding of these experiences. And so there will be people who honestly don't know why the comments were problematic. They might understand why a resident saying things about another resident is a problem, but they might also not understand why the content is a problem. They might just think it's a privacy issue. That's why it's a problem. So we don't know what the why behind or what it is that folks understand. So from the space of council who are engaging in these really difficult but very important conversations with a scenario where language has been used that's definitely indicated a gap in understanding, a historical understanding, maybe that's the place where we begin. And we see that as an opportunity for us to help, to better express a more nuanced understanding of history and a deeper understanding of history. And then emphasize, again, I can't emphasize this one enough, reaching out. So I'm not in community. From outside, I don't always know. There were many conversations that I saw where I didn't know who was talking about what, but I could tell they knew what they were talking about, right? And in those situations, if there is a way to ensure that people are okay, I think that's how you demonstrate a different kind of inclusive leadership. Because many people wouldn't anticipate that a counselor would check in on them and make sure that they're okay. But you currently have names of people, full names of some folks who were harmed. And I'm sure that you can guess that I would hazard a guess that those that were part of the creation of the Afrocentric mural are not going to feel very comfortable right now. So who can reach out, or how can we reach out to make sure that people are held with care, love, and compassion? And how can we also put a message out to the public that in our positions of leadership, this is not how we will be rolling? And that in our positions of leadership, we will be building an inclusive space. And that includes not speaking about our neighbors in a way that can truly be harmful. I think that those are all, in my world, these are opportunities to demonstrate a different kind of leadership. And I'm here and available if anybody has any other questions, even well after this. But I'm also really, really curious about whatever the next steps are with addressing the harm. I'm not talking about the monument right now. What the impact and influence, the decisions that the municipality of Kincardine makes will have on other municipalities who are also navigating similar things. And I think there is always an opportunity to be the first group of leaders that demonstrate what it looks like to be an inclusive, caring, compassionate leader.
Councillor Prunger, please.
Thank you through the chair to Dr. Lindo. I guess I'll just start that your ability to be caring and compassionate to people who are harming others is incredible. I admit I was much better at it when I was younger, and as I've grown up, and especially in recent years, I'm struggling to do what you're doing right now. And I really think that if everyone in our community could try to do that a little bit more, this process will be less painful and we could learn a lot more from it. I'd also like to say that I just for a bit of context, I come from a research background. I have a specialization in it as well, and to see the way that you've designed this process and adapted when challenges came up, and remained unbiased, and all those incredible. It's just an amazing feat you've accomplished here. I'm excited for what we can do with this and the opportunities for moving forward, and the education opportunities, the healing opportunities because of the work you've done. I'll admit, I'm not exactly sure how we do that. I'm super, super committed to figuring that out though. And I'm not going to ask any questions right now. I wouldn't mind getting in touch with you personally afterwards. I also admit I'm one of those people who get emotional about these type of things and don't like talking about it in public. So it's just easier if we do it after. But I wanted to commend you for what you've done and say that I personally appreciate the work and effort that you've put in. Thank you.
Councillor Blackwell, please.
Thank you. Through you, I will share with my fellow councillors, as they said, that I am very, very grateful for the work that you've put into this report, into our community. I'd also really like to acknowledge that we're here today not just because of, you reference this council and leadership. I don't think that it's just this council. I think that there needs to be some recognition that, I always say we stand on the shoulders of giants. There's many, many people who have been doing this work around anti-racism, around consciousness raising, both here in our community, across the province, in the States, everywhere. And so I think it is important to recognize their contributions as well. One of the things for me reading this report is it really shows that this issue is a bit of an iceberg. The monument kind of sits on top of the water, and there's a lot of different things going on underneath. There's a lot for us to grapple with. As Councillor Prenger said, this wasn't something that I went into knowing where we were going to be at the end, and I don't necessarily know that I feel all that much more prepared. But I do feel like some people were able to be very honest about their experiences and about their opinions, and that is necessary for us to understand where we go from here, because sometimes there's an assumption that we can put our finger on the pulse of the community sitting in these chairs, and that's not always accurate. And not all community members feel safe or validated when they reach out to us. So I think it was really valuable to do this process and to get a lot of um, things out into the open and in a forum that the community has a mutual beneficial starting ground to kind of move forward. So I have found this process incredibly enlightening personally. I am a lifelong Kincardine resident. That doesn't really matter. The reason I'm mentioning it is because through this process, I feel I have learned so much more about the history of my community, about the history of different residents in my community. And it has also allowed me to reflect on the fact that in this process, we are also creating history. And you mentioned that as well. And I think figuring out how to capture that and recognizing that this isn't something that we're going through in isolation, that this is something that's happening, that many communities are grappling with, and how we can share our experience, which has been far from perfect, far from easy, but that we're all striving to do better. And I think we can share those experiences with others. So again, I think that this is much more than about any one person, whether that's, Secord, to whom the monument is about, whether that's community members who are commenting. It's not about that, although I think that that's an important context, but it's much more about the community we're building and how we can start to move forward in a way that reflects the community we want to be in the future. So thank you.
Dr. Lindo, thank you so much. Once again, I'm echoing their council's comments for your presence in your report here tonight. And I will almost guarantee that you get at least one phone call, maybe more, which is a good thing. On that note, I'm arbitrarily going to declare like a 5-minute recess so that three things. Gives the bio break, provides opportunity for you to escape, and provides the gallery opportunity to say, thank goodness now we don't have to listen to the other reports that they're going to talk about. So if we're back at 5 to 7, council, please, we stand recessed for that short time. Okay, welcome council members back to the table. We're moving on with our agenda at this point. The next one was 2023 operating surplus financial services. Did you have a report on that, Director, or did you want to comment when the notice of motion comes up?
So through you, Chair, there is a report on the agenda, an information report to address some of the questions that were raised. So if council has questions now or.
Well, how about we do those both at the same time? That seems to be the appropriate time for that. So we're at 5C, market stands, provisional zoning direction. We need a mover and seconder of the council, direct staff to proceed with the proposed zoning amendments as presented with report development services 2024-20. A manager, you want to? Director? Wayne, sir, please. Oh, moved by Councillor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Hinchberger. All right, sorry, yeah, thank you. So it's my understanding that the request in this report is that council direct staff to go ahead and prepare a further report regarding the proposed zoning and or regulatory bylaw to provide appropriate spaces and times and regulations for market vendors of various types. Are there any further questions from council regarding the intent or the gist of this? Like we're not asked to do the bylaw or figure out the zones or the regulations or anything. It's either yes, move ahead, or don't go ahead. Councillor Stewart, please.
Thank you. And through you, I read the report. Well done. I would move to vote. Sorry, but I think it's pretty well self-explanatory, and I think we could move along fairly quickly. Thank you.
The question has been called, but I'm going to offer, if there's any questions, we can address them. If not, all in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Signed by law exemption for 926 Queen Street. We need a mover and seconder. The council grant a sign exemption request from sections 4.0 and 4.1 of bylaw 2003-136 for the placement of an additional non-illuminated fascia sign where only one fascia sign is permitted for each place of business and will be located adjacent to a private access lane, which is not a public street, public lane, public parking lot, or private parking, or a private parking lot accessory to the building for the property located at 926 Queen Street. Moved by Councillors Hinchberger and Kavanaugh. Are there any questions? Councillor Hinchberger, please.
Thank you, through your chair. I should advise council that the BIA Board of Management discussed this issue at their meeting earlier in July, and they actually recommend that council not approve this exemption. The area downtown, there's already, there are some legacy signage that we would say is probably legally non-compliant with the current bylaw, but it exists. And the BIA has a concern about allowing additional signage on the side where we start to detract from the sort of the feel and the atmosphere downtown. They've actually, I don't know if they've done it yet, intend to reach out to the, I guess you could say the applicant, to advise them that possibly to approach or seek a Spruce to Bruce grant in order to maybe do something a more elaborate in a perpendicular nature on the front and not on the side of the building. So just FYI for council as each of you cast your vote.
To staff is, and thank you, Councillor Hinchberger, for that. That's why you're on the BIA board for us. So thank you for that. Is just broadly speaking, is there a reason why this exemption, it's not illegal, but is there any reason that it's really important that we should do this?
Through you, Mayor, and just to echo Councillor Hinsberger's, I did find that information up from the BA that they weren't in complete support of the additional sign on the side of the building. From what this building has right now, there is some legacy signage on there. With regards to the current proposal, I couldn't find anything in my records that there was ever a legal permit for these, but again, some of these may have predated some of our sign bylaw regulatory issues, but again, it's not necessarily illegal, it's just a decision of council. They want to prove an exemption from the bylaw. Like I said, this sign does exceed what's permitted within the bylaw when you allow one sign per business, and it's generally supposed to be on the face that faces a public street. There are conditions and issues that arise from sign pollution on the sides of buildings and stuff that Councilor Hinsberger speaks about, that you want to maintain that overall appearance. But again, it's nothing that's not already probably persistent in the downtown, but it's something that needs to go through council approval.
So my question is then, as a procedural matter, is this an opportunity where we could legitimately defer this motion until there has been opportunity to have that conversation with the applicant about, you know, this is what he's likely aware of the BIA recommendation. I don't mind him bringing it forward, but it's at his peril that he may not get it. Whereas, you know, if there is some sort of a plan forward for that regarding a Spruce the Bruce grant or something, like, I'm ready to vote if the council wants to, but providing him an opportunity to come up with an alternative pathway, like he can present this again if he wants to, if it's deferred, but if not, then we just go ahead. Councillor, give me some help on this.
I don't think I can actually help you. Through you, Chair, I don't think I can actually help you, or I think we're just down to a straight vote. Yeah.
Okay. There was a motion on the floor to approve the exemption for the sign bylaw to provide an additional sign on the side of the building. All in favor of the motion? Opposed? And that's defeated. 2026 election voting method recommendation. We need a mover and seconder. The council pass a bylaw to authorize the use of alternative voting methods, specifically internet and telephone voting for the 2026 municipal and school board elections, moved by councillors Blackwell and Kavanaugh. Any discussion? Councillor Blackwell.
Thank you. Through you. I'm wondering if the clerk could speak a little bit about the process that was done in 2022, yeah, 2022 election, around providing some in-person help desks to residents who may not be as internet savvy, or who may have some more questions or issues when they're doing that. I'm just wondering, and what we're planning perhaps for 2026, if this is the path.
Through you, Mayor. In 2022, we did have a help center here at the municipal office. We also went out into the community. We had help centers on specific days at the Art Center in downtown Kincardine and the Whitney Crawford Center in Tiverton. We also did attend the various nursing homes in our community as well for assistance there. Our plan would be in 2026 to do that same model. Maybe we'll look at some different locations, but we would certainly be reaching out into the community to provide that help center in the community.
Follow up, please.
Yes, thank you. Through you. The only other question I had was related to, I had heard, and maybe I'm misinformed, that there may have been maybe a shift in 2026 in terms of how voter registration is done through Elections Ontario. I'm just wondering if you can speak on that and whether that has anything, it may not have anything to impact on the voting methodology, but perhaps registration.
So if it's about the voting technique, it's one thing. If it's registration, that's a different issue. So are you okay? Okay, we have the motion on the floor. All in favor? And that's carried. Matters for decision. So there's been a move by Mike Hinchberger, seconded by Bill Stewart, that whereas in establishing the 2024 Operating Budget Council elected not to increase the annual contribution to the Life Cycle Reserve Fund 82 by an amount equal to a 3% tax rate increase, which is about $588,000. Whereas the annual operating surplus for 2023 was $743,683, and further, the council directs staff to transfer the operating surplus for 2023 into the Life Cycle Reserve Fund 82, and that has been deferred. So we will go to the mover, Councillor Hinchberger, please.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I've talked to Councillor Stewart about this, and I'd like to propose that we amend the motion in the last line. Should read further that council directs staff to transfer $375,000 of the operating surplus. Everything else remain the same.
And is there concurrence from the seconder? Thank you. Thank you. Can you expand on the logic behind that recommendation?
Okay.
Please?
On the Friday after the last council meeting, I came into the municipal building and had a meeting with the treasurer about this. We determined that there's this ongoing thing about in the operating surplus, the way accounting methods go about how much is actually can be considered cash. I think we established that half of it, $375,000 could be considered as cash, and transferring this into the Life Cycle Reserve Fund wouldn't impair the function that the capital or contingency reserve is being used for. We had some substantive discussions about the future or a policy related to the capital contingency fund, but that would be a future issue. At this point, this has gone on for me far enough. I feel like I've brought forward the issue, and at this point, honestly, I'm less concerned with the outcome that we disposition this tonight. Thanks.
Councillor Stewart, please.
Thank you, and I concur with my fellow counselor. Basically putting the 300, which is the cash portion, because when you transfer funds into reserve funds, it's got to be cash. Not everything's cash, some of it's just paper, you know what I mean? And also this allows the taxpayers actually to see some money being returned indirectly, because every year we like to put 3% of their tax dollars into a life cycle. So it gives us a little bit of a head start next year that we have 300,000 plus into a life cycle fund. Now, let us explain. We can always move it around again. You know, things aren't set in stone and everything, and policies are policies, but we make policies. So we can actually do whatever. But for now, I think it'd be a good place to park it. So I support this motion 100%.
Director, any comments to guide our decision-making here?
Yeah, through you, Mayor. So I do think the report provides a lot of information. The 50% of the surplus was just not based on anything. It was just an estimate. Not saying that there's the cash there necessarily, but it's a number that if there's a transfer that if council would like to make a transfer into the fund, then that's a fine number to use. I do want to caution that this should not be the financial strategy long-term for asset management planning. There is a financial strategy in the asset management plan that requires an incremental increase to the contribution. And just some quick calculations that I did, it's not like for like. It's not just a 3%, which is 588,000 that we were missing out on by having the 0%. It's the incremental cumulative impact of that. And just until 2032, the impact of that is 5 million. So we're already 5 million further behind from not doing that, because we're not building on and contributing every single year. So I don't want the misinformation to be that because we've done this now, we're okay and we've made up for that tax rate increase that we've foregone. So I did want to clarify that.
Further questions? Oh, yes. Yes, we have the amendment. So the amendment is that we transfer 375,000 to the life cycle reserve, and the remaining amount would be transferred as per policy to the contingency fund. All in favor of the amendment? Anyone opposed to that? Okay, so we now have the amended motion, which means that the council directs staff to transfer the amount of 370, like half the amount, 375,000 to the life cycle reserve fund. All in favor of that motion? Anyone opposed? And that's carried. Healthcare spending. Moved by Beth Blackwell, seconded by Doug Kennedy. And in Doug's absence, we will need a seconder. Councillor Prenger, please. Whereas the state of healthcare in Ontario is in crisis, with 2.3 million Ontarians lacking access to a family doctor, emergency room closures across the province, patients being derostered, and 40% of family doctors considering retirement over the next 5 years. Whereas it's become increasingly challenging to attract and retain an adequate healthcare workforce throughout the healthcare sector across Ontario. Whereas the Ontario municipal governments play an integral role in the healthcare system through responsibilities in public health, long-term care, paramedicine, and other investments. And whereas the percentage of family physicians practicing comprehensive family medicine has declined from 77 in 2008 to 65% in 2022. Whereas per capita health spending in Ontario is the lowest of all provinces in Canada. And whereas a robust workforce developed through provincial sector-wide health human resources strategy would significantly improve access to health services across the province. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Council of the Municipality of Kincardine urge the province of Ontario to recognize the physician shortage in the municipality of Kincardine, Bruce County, and Ontario, to fund healthcare appropriately and ensure every Ontarian has access to physician care. Councillor Blackwell, comment?
Thank you, through you. Although it's long, which is typical of my motions, I did not draft this motion. It is actually a motion that was drafted by the Association of Municipalities of Ontario and the Ontario Medical Association, and they have asked councils across Ontario to support them in their advocacy to the province. I think one of the things is somewhat astonishing is that almost a third of the Ontario population is without a family doctor. At this point, it's up 160,000 people since the last 6 months. Certainly as a rural community, we are feeling this. We are doing what we can to contribute, but healthcare is a provincial responsibility. And so I just wanted to bring this forward on behalf of AMO and the Ontario Medical Association and ask for council's support in this advocacy. Thank you.
Councillor Prenger?
Thank you, through you, Chair. Just to add to that, I think it's not always clear to everyone, and it certainly wasn't to me before I joined council, that healthcare is only provincial. It's not something that we're supposed to be directly involved with. And but this type of advocacy is our job, and it's the one thing we can do and should do. Sorry, it's not the one thing we should do, but it's one of the things that we can and should do. So I get behind this 100%.
Councillor Hinchberger, please.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I don't think I have to convince anybody else in order to vote and support this. I'd just like to point out that there's a tie between this and the motion that we just did previously here. And as the treasurer pointed out, we have some shortcomings when it comes to life cycle reserve and take care of asset management. Despite what some people might think, the municipality is not flush with cash. And the deeper we go into things like healthcare, essentially someday what we're going to do, if we contribute to it, it'll almost be the equivalent of taking probably a kilometer or two of freshly paved road and ripping it up and delivering it for healthcare. Like that, there's some hard discussions that need to be had in the future about where we're going.
Can't get there because we tore up that kilometer of road. We can't get there. It's over at the hospital. It's over at the hospital. All in favor of the motion? And that's carried. Consideration of bylaws. We have the Morrison International lease agreement. We need a mover and seconder. that the Morrison International Canada Lease Agreement 2024 be deemed to be read the first, second, and third time, finally passed and numbered as bylaw number 2024-109, moved by councillors Kavanaugh and Blackwell. Any discussion? All in favor? And we have the 2026 election alternate voting methods and advanced voting bylaw. We need a mover and seconder that the 2026 election alternate voting methods and advanced voting bylaw be deemed to be read a first, second, third time, finally passed and numbered as bylaw number 2024-110, moved by councillors Blackwell and Stewart. Any discussion? All in favor? That's carried. The consent agenda. Once again, these are considered routine and enacted under one motion unless, of course, a councillor has one or more items that they would like to be withdrawn for consideration either this evening or a subsequent meeting. We need a mover and seconder that council approve the recommendations contained in the consent agenda dated July 24, 2024, and direct staff to proceed with all necessary administrative actions. Moved by.
Sorry, are we at the deputy mayor?
Yeah, we.
First? Oh, this is the rule, okay.
So we might need an amendment if we do it the other way. So you want them pulled first. Okay, so don't anybody move that. Items that you would like pulled from the consent agenda, Deputy Mayor, please.
It's item 7.1 C, D, B, A. Sorry, it's the City of Stratford call to action to meet the deadline of Accessible Ontario.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we got there. One of the things I intend to bring back to this council after going to the accessibility committee is for us to effectively write to the, or bring a motion that we write to the provincial government asking for municipal accessibility fund. We know that the deadline for an Ontario, fully accessible Ontario is 2025. So I'd like to certainly encourage the provincial government to assist with us meeting that deadline in the municipality. So it's a good letter and a good read for those who have read it. That's it.
Councillor Kavanaugh, please.
Thank you very much. And through the chair, I'd like to pull 7.1 Charlie Bravo, which is the Crime Stoppers of Grey Bruce letter and coordinator report. Since we're still waiting on the province to resolve the insurance issue with the OPP Detachment Board, I wanted to just briefly highlight this to the public and council's attention. Last year, Crime Stoppers of Grey Bruce collected 781 tips, which led to 15 arrests and resulted in over $80,000 in recovered stolen property. They're writing looking for support from municipalities to continue their program. And I want to take this opportunity to first thank our staff who has already replied to the request, like writing back to Crime Stoppers. And second, to reiterate, not just to Crime Stoppers, but to organizations in general in our public that are looking for council support for funding, and that they should be applying to the Kincardine Community Fund grant. And because that is the best way that staff would prefer that we fund endeavors going forward. Thank you.
Councillor Stewart, please.
Thank you. I don't really want to pull this one. I just want to ask a question. It's 7.1 AA Development Services Report, June 2024. As you know, I always find these reports fascinating. And once again, we almost doubled our permits. So we have a very busy sort of building department right now. But the thing that really surprised me in this report, and as I read it, under plumbing, and it says standalone, there's 3 permits, it's $1.8 million. Now that must be a misprint, or there's got to be an explanation of that kind of permit.
For the mayor, it isn't a misprint. It is correct. That plumbing permit, one in particular, was for a development on private services on Queen Street for our townhouse development at 1182 Queen. So the private servicing and infrastructure fell under a plumbing permit, being it's all private. So that entire development was serviced with both plumbing, water and sewer and storm. So that's why that infrastructure, the number for that permit application was quite large. That's it.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Anything further? Okay, so we need a mover and seconder. The council approve the recommendations contain the consent agenda and direct staff to proceed with all necessary administrative actions. Moved by,
Sorry.
Go
yeah,
ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to pull the staff report on the Tiverton Sports Center Park washrooms. It's something that I don't want to discuss tonight, but we should bring back at a future date when council is sort of read up, and perhaps staff could prepare a more in-depth report or a menu of options going forward. I just have some concerns related to the idea that a splash pad may be ready to go and ready to launch, and the municipality is set to provide possibly a porta potty there as the washroom facility for 2025. And other options to address it going forward might be something council wants to pursue in the future.
So I'd like to direct a question to our Director of Community Services, who had provided the report regarding the progression of the splash pad. Is there more that you can provide us in even in a further report? Because I thought it had laid out in that report, these are kind of the options going forward as far as that goes. So I'm not exactly sure if there's more detail that can be provided in response to Councillor Kavanaugh's request.
Thank you, and through you, I too am struggling what else I could provide council, other than through the budget deliberations, having a conversation in regards to the future of that footprint. Staff is working closely right now with the Lions Club to ensure that there is an amenity, mind you, temporary, at least to get us through next season. And at such time, hopefully we'll have a better, robust plan. I'm cognizant of adding amenities to that footprint without having a thorough plan, and where those locations of them should be addressed within that footprint.
And I would agree. I know that there have been conversations had that highlight the importance of, implementing parts of the strategic plan, recreation strategic plan, and you have spoken frequently of this is another piece, but what's the plan for the whole thing? So, Councillor Steinoff Gray, you had a question, please.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I was actually going to say that Councillor Stewart and myself actually walked down the Tiverton facility with our director. And obviously, no washrooms was definitely not an option that any of us were willing to consider. That is a bare minimum, having something that is temporary in nature until we can get this dealt with, but it is definitely a discussion item that we will have to have when we're doing the 2025 budget.
So Councillor Kavanaugh, does that suffice for an answer at this point?
That's perfect. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Thanks very much, Director. So I'm going to say this really fast. We approve the recommendations contained in the consent agenda dated July 24 and direct staff to proceed with all necessary administrative actions. Moved by Councillors Stewart and Hinchberger. All in favor? And that's carried. Member of Council, general announcements. Councillor Blackwell.
Thank you, through you. Just prior to coming out to council tonight, Councillor Hinchberger and I had the opportunity to stop into the Kincardine Legion. They were dispersing the funds from the record-breaking Catch the Ace that they just held. And so they are very pleased to share that they are donating $31,000 to 3 different groups in the community. One is the Tiverton Lions all-wheel skate park, which is the Kincardine and District Lions. Sorry, you're seeing it out of the corner of my eye. The Kincardine District Lions. Oh, that's going to come back to haunt me. The other is the Women's House, and the third is the Kincardine Food Bank. So all of those community groups will be have received now the $31,000 from the Kincardine Legion members, and just they really wanted to share how grateful they were to the community who really invested in their Catch the Ace, and I'm sure there's another one coming up soon. So it's just very exciting to see the impact in our community from those activities.
Councillor Stewart, please.
Thank you. And just to add on through you, Chair, just add on, yes, the Catch the Ace will continue. The first draw is August, I believe, the 7th. So you can buy your tickets electronically 2 weeks in advance. And yes, there's $93,000 in our pockets right now under the Tiverton Lions, and we're trying to figure out what to do with it too. Good news, and there she is over there, Director. We had some great news that the splash pad, in the history of, I've been a counselor, this has been the fastest turnover I've ever seen. And we're actually going in construction in a week or two, and we're hoping to have it finished at the end of August. And we're hoping to have 2 or 3 weeks that maybe we can play around with it as a soft sort of start. And we'll have an official opening in the spring. So all the counselors, you better work out over the winter because we'll be joining maybe our early meeting in our bathing suits. But congratulations. It was a great collaborative thing between the Tiverton Lions, the community, and the staff. Thank you.
Yeah, wrinkly people. It's not good. Councillor Prenger, please. It's your turn for outstanding community announcements. I was not chastising you for anything. It's your turn. No, no.
Good.
Sorry, thank you. I actually don't have anything to announce tonight.
Councillor Hinchberger, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. This is one of my passions in life is learning. I give a thank you to Manager Strategic Initiatives and her tourism coordinators. I've been spending 4 hours a week volunteering at the Welcome Center in Kincardine to try to get a better grasp of the tourism industry and what it means for our community. And it is like a breath of fresh air sometimes in some of the things that we deal with to listen and entertain people who are coming into our community from elsewhere. I'm surprised that most of them, many show up with no plan at all, day trip going over there. They're wide-eyed, and the opportunity to hear them discuss sort of what they look for, what they like, and the number of people. The other day, we were talking with somebody and we said, well, what's new with you? We just moved here today. And where they're looking for things in there. And sometimes we can often get buried in the issues in front of us. And it's really good. It almost helps you get back to what you used to call like the 30,000 foot level when you discuss with people that don't even actually live here. It's a good resetting of perspective.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. Nominations are open for the Afro-Caribbean Youth Awards, which are taking place end of October. The nominations close September 1st.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much. And through the chair, Friday, August 2nd from 4 to 9 p.m. is the cruise night downtown from Victoria or Queen Street all the way down to Victoria Park there. I know I'll be there enjoying some of the live music that's going to be going on. So I encourage everyone to come out and enjoy the show. Take care.
Councillor Stanoff Gray, please.
I have no announcements today. Thanks.
Just to expand on Councillor Kavanaugh's announcement, I understand Lisa Thompson is going to be at Cruise Night on the 2nd of August, 8, and Ben Lobb, 8:30. There's presentations by themselves, so yeah, should be a good night. CAO, have good news for us?
I think almost everything has been taken off my list here, so I don't have much to say other than, and this isn't good news, but it's National Drowning Prevention Week is this week. So just a reminder for focusing on educating families related to drowning. And we are doing work here in our community to help educate and support and make people aware of the risks. So just a reminder about that.
Okay, we have the confirmatory bylaw. We need a mover and seconder that the bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of the Municipality of Kincardine of July 24, 2024 be deemed to be read a first, second, third time. Finally passed and numbered as bylaw number 2024-111, moved by Councillors Hinchberger and Stewart. All in favor? This council meeting adjourned at 7:30, moved by Councillor Blackwell and Deputy Mayor Clark. All in favor?